Hey, Peter, welcome to the show.
Hey, what's up, Shannon? So great to be here.
Glad to have you. Would you mind just introducing yourself to the folks listening? Let them know who you are.
Yeah, so my name's Peter. I work specifically primarily with accountants and like financial services firms on their marketing. So I'm a consultant for them. We've developed a lot of like frameworks and just strategies that tend to work really, really well for service type businesses that are trying to charge, thousands and thousands of dollars for a specific set of deliverables or a specific outcome. And so I've been working with these folks for about 2 years now.
Awesome. And I was joking before we hit record, like, what a great niche to pick, because obviously I'm partial, but also I joke around and say, like, we're not the easiest clients to work with. So kudos to you for putting up with us.
Yeah, there's pros and there's cons, but I think when you
Yeah.
build a system specifically for whoever your niche specific client is, if you can just get in their head and build a system that that they're going to love, then it becomes really easy to work with them.
And I think it's such a great example of a use case because admittedly, and I'm just going to generalize for all of us accountants out there, we tend to be a pretty stubborn bunch who are kind of stuck in our way on, thinking that, okay, we have to create content. And then we have a definition of what that means in our head. And I think we're a little bit more, I don't want to say rigid, but we just kind of think in this one dimensional way of like, I have to go create content, which means I have to post things on Facebook and LinkedIn, and that I just have to check the box that I did that today, as opposed to doing something with a little bit more intention. Could you talk about maybe the types of clients you work with in terms of where they start and how they interpret what they should be doing with marketing?
Yeah, and I think this goes for a lot of business owners, not just limited to like my niche that I've specifically chosen to work with. And so for your audience, for everybody listening, I think a lot of us believe that either we're boring or what we have to say just isn't interesting enough to like quote unquote go viral, right? So that causes us to either just kind of mail it in with content where we're just like, I'm overwhelmed. There's so much that I need to do. I need to go viral on all these different platforms, and there's all these different algorithms. And so you just end up mailing it in, or a lot of times what I see is you just give up or don't even try entirely. But I think when you can understand just the structure and really cater towards what people want to hear, what individuals want to hear, rather than what you think the algorithm wants to see, that's where you may not go viral, but you definitely will connect with those people in your audience and in your circles who are that ideal client that you're searching after.
Yeah, I always say that too, that like you're not trying to serve everybody, especially in a professional services firm. We typically have a cap on how many clients we can actually serve.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's more important that we find the right people we want to align with and that we connect with them and we develop those relationships, because it's really, I always say we're transacting trust. That's what I always say when it comes to professional services is it's a trust-based business, and so much more important to start those relationships. And, what would you say to folks who maybe they're in a particular industry? I just use professional services as an example, but maybe they're hesitant because they're like, well, I don't know if social media is really generating me any ROI. I'm not seeing ROI from it. And so what is my motivation to post or to create? What is kind of your objection to that?
I mean, the reason you don't see any ROI is because you don't have a system that works. Most of the time, especially in professional services, people just start posting like quote unquote like valuable tips around the thing they do. What they don't realize is like your ideal client doesn't want to know all the ins and outs of this specific tax strategy or that specific tax strategy. They just want you to do it, right? And so you're not going to attract people by teaching them. Maybe you'll attract other accountants, but like that's not a very valuable, unless you're trying to start a coaching program for accountants, that's not a valuable audience for you, right? Just to use accounting as an example. But if you can instead get in the mind of your ideal client, what do they want? And I always start, this is the structure. I've actually never dropped this on a podcast before, but this is the structure I use with every piece of content and every ad, just everything that goes out where I'm in front of a camera. And it's, you want to agitate pain that your ideal audience is facing. So if you can get in their head and figure out like, what is the exact specific problem that they're dealing with right now? So you want to agitate that and make it feel like really, really extra painful. Then what you want to go, okay, what is their ideal outcome? Were this pain removed from their life? So in other words, like, what are they chasing after? What's the dream scenario? What does they want life and business to look like? And then we're going to elevate that and make it look super, super sexy. And so if you know where they're at, point A, and where they want to be, point B, then it makes it really easy to take your offer and just map that as the roadmap that's going to get them from point A to point B.
That makes total sense. And we said agitate the pain. I don't want to confuse that with being super negative or using a lot of
Right.
different certain language, right? So as opposed to like, it's been a while since you've been on vacation, right? Well, we have this trip to Miami and it's amazing, blah, 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 right? But as opposed to, doesn't your life suck? Wouldn't you rather be here? It's a little bit different when you're trying to do in
Yeah.
the extremes, right? You're more so
Yeah.
you're getting an appetite or an itch to scratch in a sense, not necessarily making them feel like shit.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. That's what we're trying to do. And that's what I always said, because people would always, I guess you hear all these like these gurus and these strategists on social media, they'd say like really hone in on the pain point. And I think people take that a little literally and they'll really go in on like why everything is terrible. And I go, yeah, but you have to also position it where it's recoverable and this is a temporary state and it can be better, where it's not a permanent state of mind.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people, especially like you see the quote unquote like tough love influencers,
Yeah.
like what's his name, Andy Elliott. I'm sure everybody's like seen some of his content where he's just like yelling at people, right?
Yeah. The Gordon Ramsays.
Yeah. Gordon Ramsay's the OG for that.
I know.
And so, I mean, you can do that and you can go viral and you can get views. But again, if our goal is not to get views, it's to get the right clients to come to us, then yeah, you kind of come at it from a standpoint of compassion and be like, hey, like, you're experiencing this pain. Like, I hate that for you. You want this dream outcome, and I love that for you. So like, let's do this together. Here's the way you can go from where you are now to where you want to be.
I love that. That really is kind of following, because I subscribe to the story brand framework, which is that idea that we are positioned as the guide to assist the hero in their journey to triumph. And that's exactly what that's doing, is saying, hey, I got you. I see you're struggling with this and it doesn't have to be that way. Fundamentally, I believe that you deserve better and I'll show you what that looks like. I completely agree on that strategy. Where do you think, I know you mentioned that a lot of people are posting these educational tips. This is something that I think every online coach, every health professional, every accountant even, we're all hearing this stuff of post your 5 tips, post a carousel, post the 3 things you got to do, da 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 da. And I agree with you. I think there's a certain point where that starts to kind of go, nah, it doesn't really work anymore, or people just aren't really consuming that type of content anymore. What's your take on that and predictions on how well pure education content is doing?
Yeah, I think pure education has I mean, you look at anybody who started out in pure education. I'll use like Alex Hormozy as a perfect example, right? Like when he first started his personal brand a couple of years ago, or started going hard on it, like it was very highly educational. You go back to his older YouTube videos and he's like in his closet office with like a shitty webcam and some slides, or like he's just talking to his computer, right?
Yeah.
And it's purely educational. And while I love that stuff, realistically, like there's a lot of people who can create that. Everybody's got some topic that they're an expert in. And so that's like the way I kind of see it, is that's no longer your like most forward facing content. You still have it for those people who are already wrapped up in your brand because it kind of nurtures their trust in you. But that's not going to grab their attention initially. And so what I really love is this format. A lot of people call it like edutainment, but kind of like entertaining and educating at the same time. And that works differently for different people. But if you look at Hormozy, like he tends to use a lot of storytelling in that. Every concept that he's trying to teach, he goes back to, when I was working at a department store when I was 17 back in high school, this is something I learned from how my manager dealt with an angry customer. And we've all got those experiences, right? We've all got those high school jobs or those college jobs. We've all got those, past friends who did crazy, stupid stuff that we all, learned the easy way from. And so if you can kind of pull from those stories and apply those frameworks and those mindsets to your ideal client, then I think that tends to work a lot better than just straight, like, here's my top 5 tips for saving $5,000 in taxes this year.
Exactly. And to your point, though, too, when you say we all have those stories, I think that's also the excuse people use. Well, everyone has those
Mhm.
stories. Why am I special? What makes me original to produce this content? What are some of the ways that you've seen people kind of get in their own way about creating content because they just think that their story is unoriginal, or who the hell would care about what my manager said to me when I was 16?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's super true, that you bring that up, and I mean, I always tell people, like, again, we're going back to what I said initially, we're not trying to go viral, right? We're not
Right.
trying to get millions of people to love us. We're trying to get whatever 200 clients to pay us $5,000 a year for tax planning, something along those lines, right? And
Mhm.
so, like, can you be special? Can you look super smart? Can you look like the ideal person to work with for 200 people out of, the entire 330 million people in the US? Like, I think you probably can.
Exactly. And you can do it without even copying what anyone else is doing. You can do it with your
Mhm.
own flavor, your own spin, your own language. You know, I'd say look at how many accountants there are in the United States and narrow it down to how many will say shit on a podcast over and over again. And then that cuts it down. And there are some people
Yeah.
who like that, which thank you for being here. But
Yeah.
there are some people who like that and they'll relate to you. But like that's an extreme example, but it's one of those things where just you being willing to be candid or to do it in your way or one
Mhm.
aspect of your story someone can relate to. I do actually have a little bit of a story to that is I was on a podcast recently and I got a bunch of consult calls basically booked from that podcast. And I said, just curious, what attracted you to me or what made you book the call? Oh, that story you told about your dad. That story you told about your husband. That story you told about your first job. Every
Yeah.
single one. And it wasn't those 3 cash flow tips you told me about,
Mhm.
or that thing you told me I have to go do, and like the fact that I need my EIN or whatever it is. It's like nobody remembered a single piece of information I shared. They remembered how one of my stories made them feel.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of a given, isn't it? That
Yeah.
when somebody needs to, how to do their EIN or when they need an LLC or like those kind of things. Like
Yeah.
you've got the letters CPA attached at the end of your name. Um, and that's all the credential you should need. Sadly
Yeah.
there's a lot of CPAs who, still can't keep up with a lot of that stuff, but that's another topic completely.
Yeah.
But the point
Yeah.
being, like, you don't have to prove your knowledge first. You have to prove that you're a relatable person who is like actually enjoyable to be around and just somebody that I can relate with on a peer-to-peer level. I was talking with a
100%.
financial advisor client of mine recently, and he was talking about like that's the number one thing that his favorite clients that he works with. He asked them like, "Hey, why did you end up wanting to work with me?" And they were like, "Because you feel relatable." He's a younger guy. He's like late 20s, early 30s. And so that was really important to his ideal clients who are all kind of like millennials, maybe like older Gen Z.
Yeah.
And they're like, if I was with somebody older, if I was working with like a 50-year-old or 60-year-old white guy financial advisor, like every time I tell him or show him something in my financial situation that's less than ideal, I feel like he was judging me
Yeah.
just because of that, just because he's not relatable in that way, right?
Yeah.
And so I
It's an
think that's a big
association.
thing. I think that's a big thing in these like financial services kind of firms. It's like it's a very intimate, very, very intimate partnership.
I completely agree. And I think it's with anything where you have a certain degree of expertise, where you have a credential, even if you don't have a credential, but you just know that you're an expert in a particular topic, even if it's health and fitness or if
Mhm.
it's law or anything like that. When you are positioned as the expert, I think that people go above and beyond trying to prove almost to themselves why they're an expert through their organic content, as
Mhm.
opposed to just assume I'm the expert and just go from there. And I think people are just working so hard to prove the expertise. You're smiling at that. Do you agree?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I think people want to like prove themselves, right? Like I look back at even like, to tell a story about this, like when I was in college, like I had this like very toxic need to prove myself to everybody. And that just created this lifestyle where I was just go go go. I was sleeping 4 to 6 hours a night because I was like I had to get A's in all my classes to prove myself to my professors. I had to be the leader of all these student organizations to prove myself to my friends and my peers. um, I had to work the job with the guy that like my dad kind of knows, to prove myself to my dad's friends. And so there was all these things, all these areas I had to prove myself in, where if you can just kind of like sit back and like you're confident within yourself of, yeah, I know these things, then you don't feel like you have to prove yourself on that level. Rather, it's just, here's who I am. Let me show you the type of person I am. And if you connect with that, then like, hey, let's work together.
Absolutely. And you know what's really funny is it almost has a diminishing return the harder you try.
Yeah, 100%.
Because if you're really trying hard to prove yourself, then it's like, why are you trying so hard to prove yourself? If you just show up like it's already been proven, then it's kind of like you just carry yourself in that confidence, right?
Yeah. Well, and you got to ask yourself, is it sustainable trying to prove yourself on that level too?
Mhm.
Because if you think about
Absolutely.
like all of those relationships that I built on that basis, like I don't have relationships with most of those people today, those friends, those professors, the coworkers, whoever. And it's because in part the relationship was built on me proving myself, and you can only work like that for so long. But if the relationship
Absolutely.
is instead built on a sense of personal connection, we like each other, I have this trust that you know what you're doing and you're going to be able to handle my situation, then that's sustainable because that's just who you are inherently.
Right. And you mentioned too, Peter, the system and the structure that you follow, right? As you walk through,
Hmm.
like this is how you can structure your content. What are the pieces of advice you would have for those listening who maybe are in their head a little bit on this? They're relating to this and saying, yeah, I am an expert in my field, but it's difficult for me to share that expertise in a certain way. It's hard for me to meet my client where they're at, or it's hard for me to activate that relatability. What are some tips you have that have helped your clients become more relatable that they've used to be successful?
I mean, I would ask if you're working with the right people then, like if you're targeting the right type of client. Because
Good
if you're
point.
trying and trying and trying, like it shouldn't be this thing that you have to put a ton of effort in, to be relatable. If you feel like you have to put on a character in order to meet the expectations of your ideal client, like you can't put on that character forever. And so maybe you need to pick a different market or a different niche to target.
Yeah, I think you have to pick something that is easily relatable to your story. And I would add to that probably is infusing more storytelling in what you're doing as opposed to the like we said the pure education,
Hmm.
or maybe, you know, how else could we maybe, in a sense, I'm trying to think of some ideas of what we've done before, but like we can borrow credibility too by who we associate with on social media, collaborate, do other things like that too, right? It's more than just having to sit in a silo in content creation and come up with all your own ideas and educate
Hmm.
the whole world and think you're in this by yourself. What are some other strategies that you use with clients to help expand their reach to become more relatable, but also just to get a bigger audience?
Yeah, that's actually a great point. What you bring about up, like borrowing credibility from other people. One of my first clients, I think a big part of the reason why, so he's a real estate CPA, works specifically with mostly like short-term rental investors. And a big
I
part of like
probably know him.
you probably know him.
Yep.
His name's Ryan.
Yep.
But he a big part of like how he initially grew his firm was through Facebook groups hosted by other people and
Yep.
guessing on podcasts hosted by other people. And so he was able to borrow credibility from these people. He wasn't on other accountants or in other accountants groups. He was in he was on the short term shop with Avery Carl a couple times. He was in Bill Faith's like Build Short Term Rental Wealth group, and he built relationships with the hosts of these communities, but also he just provided value to the people within these communities. And in doing so, he was able to kind of garner some of that same respect they had for the host, was now transferred to Ryan. We call that like transfer of authority, right?
Yes.
So that's one strategy that I think you can do that works really well. And the other thing, this is something I personally do, is I try to the time when I spend time like coming up with content ideas, not necessarily in front of the camera, but just like jotting notes down for my podcast or for my Instagram. I try to do that like right after I've taken a couple of client calls, because that means like I was just like in it with a few of my clients, going through the exact problems that they're dealing with right now and like helping them solve them. And so you're completely out of your own head in that space. You're not trying to like dig through like, oh, like what do I know that would be helpful for these people? It's just, what do they need? Like were we just talking about? And just draw from that.
Yeah. Yeah, when I first started working with someone on social media, one of the exercises I went through, because they asked me, when do you feel like you're at your best? And I said, when I'm on the fly on like a call with clients, they're asking me
Hmm.
questions. I'm really good with Q&A, but like you asked me to come out of like a blank canvas and come up with ideas of what to create, I'm somehow useless.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? Here's what we could do. And this is actually why most of my episodes are phrased as questions, you guys. Because what we did was we went through the library of like question, like what are the most common questions you get DMs about? What are the most common questions people are asking in your emails, in your IMs, in your whatever it may be? We wrote down those questions, and somebody, because I hated recording at the time, I've gotten much better after 500 episodes, but I hated recording in the first 20. And I said, you know what, guys? I will pay somebody to sit across from me and ask me these questions. And I actually had people sit and ask me questions. I would just start saying, like, come on for free and ask me questions, and I'll record the answers. And those answers became podcast episodes because they were real, honest answers in conversational tone. Because I said, I get to actually show up with the energy I have with my clients as well. So I think
Hmm.
that's a big part of it too, is also being excited about answering those questions and serving.
Yeah, no, 100%. There's a business coach I follow. His name's Dan Bolton, and
Mhm.
the way he does his podcast is like at least one out of every 3 episodes is a client call that he recorded. And he just like,
Mhm.
I think this probably wouldn't work as well for financial services just because you're kind of going over like sensitive data. But if you
True.
do any sort of group call or webinar, this is a great way to just get your content like effortlessly on autopilot. You know, like he's
Oh
doing
yeah.
these client calls regardless. Um, and the great thing there too is like it ends up spanning his entire ideal client profile because he's recording calls with all of his different clients. And so, I may not resonate with the dating coach that he's talking to today, but I probably will resonate with the marketing coach he's talking with tomorrow.
For sure. For sure. And we're really like hovering over the organic content, right? This is all in the
Hmm.
context of organic content, which we're going to get into paid content soon. But you brought up a really good point when it comes to like the professional services firms and generating that content. We have sensitive data, so we tend to sit a lot in fear of, well, what if I share something? And this goes for anyone in any profession where this is the case, where there's risk involved. Financial advisors, especially with the regulations,
Hmm.
they're saying, well, I have to be really careful. I have to disclaim the crap out of everything because if God forbid somebody takes my information and does something with it and they experience financial loss, hardship, damages, whatever it may be, can they come after me? How do you help people manage that sort of fear around, well, what happens if someone doesn't follow this properly?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same. The regulations there are kind of the same mindset as like the instructions on your shampoo bottle. Like, who actually needs those, right? Um,
I
so
love that.
on the one, and I'm gonna preface this by saying like I don't have a perfect solution here, but
Mhm.
it's kind of on the one hand, it's like okay, there's this kind of subgroup of people that maybe will follow whatever advice they hear online, right? And we have to choose whether or not we're going to cater to the lowest common denominator that might possibly be consuming our content. But on the other hand, we also like if we're giving disclaimers every 5 seconds and we have to like kind of catch whatever we're saying and like, well, on the other hand, this, but on one hand, this, like, are you actually able to provide any real value to people doing that? And so I
Yeah.
think like, especially you brought up financial advisors, like this is kind of one of the things that is tough in that niche is like, there are very heavy regulations, right?
Yeah.
Now, I think a lot of people are way more conservative around those regulations than they have to be. Um, but at the same time, there's a lot of risk involved there. So I guess all that to say, I
Yeah.
don't have a perfect solution, but I think most people who bring that up are just being overly cautious.
Yeah, and I subtly joke around the fact that if someone wants to bring up in court a 30-second video of me dancing and pointing and say, this is where I got my advice, go for it.
Yeah,
But
100%.
it's also, and like even blogs and other things like that. The way I navigate around this too, Peter, is the way I navigate around it is I don't have the answer for everybody. But I bet you 70 to 80% of you are going to find this answer helpful. And I don't know
Mhm.
which bucket you're in. That's where you have to go talk to your tax pro. But in order to serve the majority of you, this is generally what I see. To me, that is safe because I'm going,
Mhm.
I don't know if this applies to me, but if I rolled the dice, it might. So I should listen, but I shouldn't take it at face value, bold point font in ink, and go do this without checking. So it's kind of that idea of I want you to take this with you as typically the advice I would give, but there's a little bit of a caveat there that's more practical other than disclaiming every other sentence.
Yeah, and I think that works really, really well in long form.
Yeah.
And short form, again, like if you're gonna bring up that 30-second video in court, like have at it, buddy.
Yeah, like this TikTok made me do it. I don't think that holds up anyway. I really don't think that would hold up. That should not hold you back from creating content. Okay, great. So let's dive into the paid content. I want to talk about Facebook ads because this has been a black box I have not been able to figure out. And I've been so scared of it, honestly, myself, that I haven't dabbled in it whatsoever because I'm just like, oh, I don't know much
Mhm.
about that. So I'm not touching it. Tell me about, at a very basic level, who should be considering using Facebook ads and what they should probably have in place before doing it, before they jump on this bandwagon.
Yeah, so I get a lot of firms coming to me who are doing maybe, it's one person, they like just quit their corporate job and they're doing maybe 50 to $100,000 a year, and they ask, "Am I ready to run ads?" And my answer to them is always 100% no. Um, because you just don't have the margin. With ads, you cannot be reliant on, hey, I need to get clients from this within the next 2 weeks or within the next month, or like
Mm.
putting a hard timeline on it like that. Because there's just so much testing you have to do, and you have to be willing and able to burn a little bit of money in order to get those results that you're looking for. So
So
the
you
person that
recommend a budget for that or having a certain amount of cash saved up to be able to play around and test without hitting that threshold of, oh no, we're losing money on this?
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's a couple things that you should probably invest into. Number one is investing into like some education around it. And that could just be an investment of your time because there is a ton of free content on YouTube about running Facebook ads. Um, the other thing is just like you need to have minimum, you need to have probably $2,000 to $3,000 that you could just light on fire and be okay with, I'm not going to get this back. Because like if you're spending under, I usually say like $30 to $50 a day, and you're not willing to do that for at least 6 to 8 weeks without seeing any like real measurable results, then you're not giving yourself enough time to win.
I would agree. It's that mentality of like bet what you can lose,
Hmm.
right? So you're like, I don't want to say this is betting because there's definitely some strategy and control that you have over this, which we
Yeah.
can talk about how to optimize results. Like you're not just throwing money into the middle and going, okay, run the roulette wheel, right? It's not that chance based, but
Hmm.
it should be kind of that mentality of I'm going to put in what I can afford to lose, what I can afford to call tuition and learn from, and then
Hmm.
keep lather, rinse, repeating, right?
Yeah, well, it's just like any other new strategy that you're trying in your business. If you
Right.
hire a new employee, right? Like you can't expect them to be at 100% capacity. Their second week on the job. It's going to take a
Absolutely.
couple months to get them up to speed. So it's kind of the same thing here. You just got to be able to give it a little bit of time before you make a decision on whether this works or not.
Yeah. So obviously there's an importance to iterate and to figure out what works for you. And there's obviously a ton of nuance in terms of how you're
Hmm.
applying it, some context. But what have you seen generally that tends to accelerate those results or things that you've seen work for folks, whether it be a macro strategy or something really specific in terms of a tactic that has worked well for your clients?
Yeah. So I guess if I can kind of back up and just define like because there's kind of two main different ways that you can run ads
Yeah.
on any platform, right? But specifically, I work a lot with Facebook and Instagram, so I'll talk specifically in those terms. You can do what's called a direct response funnel, where essentially this is what like probably 90% of ads you see are. It's an ad, and then it sends you to a landing page. And on the landing page, there's some info about the offer. There might be like a longer video to watch through. And then ultimately, you're called to action to either like book a call or just, add to cart and check out there. So that's a
Yep.
direct response ad. And that's not like direct response is not limited or was not invented when Facebook ads were invented. Like people were doing that with mailers long before we ever had Facebook, right?
Yeah.
Now the other type of funnel, and it's a little bit newer, but it's called a social funnel. And essentially what you're doing is you're paying on the front end to get your exact ideal client to follow you on social. insert your favorite social platform here. People do this on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. But essentially the idea is we're going to wait a little bit longer before we throw that right hook, in Gary Vee terms, right? So we're
Yeah.
going to pay for this person, this exact specific ideal client, to come join our audience. They're going to consume our content. They're probably going to, they might have a DM conversation with us on Instagram or Facebook Messenger. And then ultimately, then we ask them to buy after they've built up that trust. So that being said, both strategies work incredibly well. I think there's a limit to how much scale you can achieve with the social funnel, just because it's a little bit more it's a little bit closer relationship with the prospect before they ever book a sales call with you. But both work incredibly well. And so given that, I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Yeah. So when we're talking about that, actually, I want to dive into that a little bit more. So you're talking about, it's really a short game, long game transaction. If you had to bundle it up, right? It's kind of the direct response, which is the buy now, just buy my thing,
right,
versus the please come into my ecosystem and become part of my audience that I can later sell to or use however I see fit. Specifically, though, you mentioned the social funnel, but can people apply this to, say, promoting a lead funnel, like a freebie, or promoting their podcast, or promoting other platforms where maybe they're showing up? Would you recommend doing something like that? Or do you recommend, if you're going to use that type of thing, keeping it to, if it's a social funnel, keeping it to the platform that they are on, so it's a little bit of an easier transition?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. I'm itching for a pad and paper to be able to draw this out for you. But so I personally use Instagram for my social funnel. Most of my clients also use Instagram for their social funnels. That's kind of specifically what my coaching program is built around, is how to build your social funnel. And so what we do is we're paying for these people to join our audience on Instagram. But let's imagine you've got a podcast, right? Well, if you share your podcast and you're sharing clips from it on your feed, you're sharing, new episode just dropped, here's the link. You're sharing that on your stories. You're going to get a lot of those, especially the people who are the most engaged and the most likely to eventually buy from you. They're going to go check out the podcast. And if they like the podcast, then that helps a ton with just they're spending more face time with you and they're sitting down with you for longer periods of time at once, right? Same for freebies, right? You can set up DM automations where it's hey, DM me the word tools for my free tools pack for real estate investors. I was literally just setting up an automation this morning for one of my clients who made a tutorial on how to fill out your BOI report. And so, then you get people into your CRM database. They start getting email marketed to, and they still follow you on Instagram, and they're consuming your content there. So it's kind of a double whammy where it you can do a direct response funnel almost on the bottom of your social funnel, and get people into your ecosystem on other platforms as well.
Yeah. And so going back to, my prior question was really directed toward specific tactics that people use that are successful with ads, or maybe the macro strategy of this is generally what you should be doing. I think you nailed it with a little bit of both, which is, approaching it from these two different angles and kind of figuring out what fits you right now based on your objectives, your goals, but also if you're going to do this, here's how you could specifically find success with it. So, I mean, is it as simple as static images, videos? What do you think is the recipe for a good ad broadly? And I know it will depend, just like what we always do to you guys.
Yeah.
It depends, but what are some of the things that you've seen work really well?
So when we were talking about organic content, I kind of shared the framework that I use for that. But if you think about it, a paid ad really should just be your best piece of organic content with now you're putting money behind it, right? Now, I would not recommend doing exactly that, but it uses the same frameworks. And so if you can get really clear on the pain your prospect is feeling or your ideal client is feeling presently, aka where they are right now, if you can get really clear on the dream outcome, what they'd like to experience in the future, should this problem be removed from their life, aka where they want to be, then it makes it really easy to insert call to action here, whatever you're trying to get them to do, whether it's click the link below for a direct response ad, whether it's DM me this word for a freebie or a lead magnet, or whether it's follow me here on Instagram for the social funnel, top of funnel ads. Whatever your call to action is, ultimately, it's really easy to map that as the roadmap from A to B if you understand where they are now and where they want to be.
Got it. Would you say that typically would you say you see higher conversion from calls to action that don't require an actual monetary transaction? Like if it's follow me or DM me, do those typically get higher traction than the direct response? Or is there any sort of pattern that you're picking up on those?
Yeah, they definitely can. I mean, so I'll give you an example. I just did a testimonial video actually with one of my clients, and he told me he spent $2,600 in ads in total over the last 4 months, and he added $26,000 per year of recurring revenue to his business. So it's a 10x
Wow.
ROI. You don't often
Yep.
see that from direct response ads. Usually, direct response is like usually like a 3x cash collected is like pretty good.
Yeah.
Up to maybe like 5x for contract value if you're doing the math that way. But
Mhm.
yeah, so all that to say, I think social funnel or asking for making a free ask definitely can create higher ROI. I think the main thing though here is we're actually like Instagram wants to keep people on the platform. And so when you think about it, if you're running a direct response ad with a link there, they're automatically going to charge you more for that, or they're going to be incentivized to charge you more for that, just because you're taking people off of their platform.
Right.
Whereas the social funnel, that's part of what I love about it is you're keeping people on the platform until the very end.
Right. And keeping them on platform, keeping everybody happy, but also, let's be honest too, it's easier for you because if they're there seeing your ad, then they spend time on that platform. So then they'll
Hmm.
probably follow you and actually engage with your content as opposed to saying, follow, like go listen to my podcast, for example. I'm not saying that's a bad idea, but think about this. If you say go listen to my podcast, I don't know if they're a podcast listener
Yeah,
necessarily.
yeah.
So and that's actually a great transition into me asking you about targeting.
Hmm.
What are the ways that people can target particular people and make sure the right people are seeing their ads? Like how specific do we have to get?
Yeah, so if you've got a little bit of time and money to burn, actually automatic targeting works insanely well.
Hmm.
Facebook has really, really well developed their AI and their targeting there to understand what your video is about, and then to understand like, okay, if somebody's behaving like this with this video, then that means they are the person that this video is supposed to be in front of. Now, the downside of that is if your messaging is not on point, then your performance is going to suck, right? And so that's
Hmm.
where like getting your messaging down perfectly, if you can spend 100% of your time on that, then automatic targeting will actually do you just fine. Now, I personally, automatic targeting takes a little bit of time to figure stuff out. I personally, when I started my social funnel, I had about probably 2,500 followers, all of whom were like photographers, videographers, kind of creative industry. That's my past career was actually in wedding filmmaking.
Hmm.
And so I knew like it's going to take a really, really, really long time for Facebook and Instagram to figure this out, simply because like my existing audience is so far off from who I'm actually trying to reach. And so you can do something called a lookalike audience, where you can pull an email list. There's people on Fiverr that'll do this for a couple $100, but you just tell them like what kind of emails you need. So for me, it's like I need tax and accounting firm owners in the U.S. And so they'll pull those off of LinkedIn or some other platform, and you can actually import this into Facebook as a custom audience, and then essentially tell Facebook, hey, I want you to find me more people like this. So it's just called a lookalike audience. You think, you're giving them, here's the people I want, find me people who look like this. And so that's a great
Yeah.
way to do your targeting if you're not 100% confident in your brand messaging, or if you're just like, I need these ads to work like in the next couple of weeks versus I have a couple of months to really get this dialed in.
Yeah. And I've heard that you can also target based on like find people who follow this other person, whether it's a competitor or a like-minded person. Do you recommend people do anything like that? Or is it better to find more people like the customer as opposed to more people like you?
Yeah, so I don't tend to do that, just because you think, okay, like putting myself in a tax accountant's shoes, right?
Hmm.
Who out there has an audience that I'm looking for? Well, there's some
Hmm.
big names who we don't need to mention, but they've got really large audiences. But realistically, based on their content, it's probably not the highly engaged audience that I'm actually looking for. The people willing to pay me $5,000 to $10,000 a year for a tax plan.
Mhm.
Or there's the people who, like me, probably have smaller audiences of perhaps the right people, but that's just not enough data for Facebook to be able to make an accurate decision on like who to show your ads to. So that's why I really like the lookalike audience strategy, because it's like, maybe it's $400 for a list of 10,000 emails on Fiverr. You clean that up, maybe it's only 5,000 like real, like legit ones, but still that's a ton of data for Facebook to work with in order to figure out who you're actually trying to get in front of.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really good point, because I think that what makes it so overwhelming, at least for me, and I think for most folks listening, is the sky's the limit. There's so much capability with
Hmm.
these tools
Hmm.
that you go, wow, I could easily spend a lot of money figuring this out,
Yeah.
but also, spending a lot of money to learn it, spending a lot of money to figure it out. But there's also so much potential in terms of what you can make from it. I just think people have a very people will focus on the short game. They'll say, I'm
Hmm.
not making much ROI from it. I mean, yeah, but you're probably building audience. You're probably building
Hmm.
relationships. You're probably getting out there more. And like, how's your follower count doing? Or are people engaging with the ads? I think there's just so much more to it than the straight purchases to look at.
Yeah, well, and that's the difference between like kind of the social funnel strategy and the
Hmm.
traditional direct response strategy, right? Because direct response is like 100% numbers based. If I'm
Right.
not converting at this certain percentage, then I'm not profitable. I've only got whatever I charge $5,000. I can only spend $1,000 on ads before I start cutting into my actual margin. And then that's problematic for people, right?
Hmm.
And you're not necessarily, if you're not getting people to convert through direct response, then there's not really side benefits that you're experiencing.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a lose-lose there if you're not profitable. Whereas with the
Yeah.
social funnel, it's like, hey, I've actually got a little bit more time because I am building audience. Like worst case scenario, I can just go through my follower list and DM every single one of these people. And that's going to result in a few sales conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when we play these numbers games, I think a lot of people are really focused on this idea of winning by getting X number of leads or X number of return on ad spend or whatever it may be. And I'm like, well, is it profitable and are you attracting the right people?
Hmm.
Fundamentally, you can have a smaller audience, but if it's the right people, it pays off.
Hmm.
I've always had a relatively small audience. I think I have somewhere in the 6 to 7,000 range right now.
Hmm.
And I say that's relatively small because people used to like it used to be 10K to even play in the field of like having a good following. And remember when they used to have like swipe up for 10K and up or whatever, they
Yeah.
have like certain features.
Yeah.
Now it's kind of like I don't care because I have people who DM me all the time. I don't care because
Hmm.
I have people who are really engaged with it as opposed to the passive watchers and the bots and all the other stuff. So I think that it's really important to focus on if what you're doing is working based on the result you actually want to achieve and having clarity on that first and foremost.
Yeah, 100%. And like chasing after that large follower count ultimately just waters down your audience to where, if 10% of your audience is going to see your content that you're posting every single day, well, now if you water that down, that may not be the people that you're actually trying to reach, and the people you're actually trying to reach may not actually see your stuff.
Very
I
true.
almost get a little bit, if I get a DM or a follow from an account with like over like 20,000 followers, I actually like my guard kind of goes a little bit up because there's so many people just buying followers and then using those to like spam DMs, right? And
Yeah,
so I
I
kind of
agree.
wonder to myself, like, okay, is this person legit? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, and then you go down to like, do you do what I do? Go down to the content and I see how many people engage with the content
Yeah, I
because
look
that's
at their
also an
like count or
indicator.
their view count, and it's like, oh, he's got 100,000 followers and he gets like 60 views on his videos.
Yeah, it's like who's actually seeing the content. So as we kind of wrap this up, Peter, what are some of your we'll say I won't hold you accountable to this, right? No need to disclaim, but some of your
Hmm.
predictions or where you think trends are heading when it comes to what's working on social media, both from an organic and a paid front, like what's in, what's out. Where are
Yeah.
we heading?
So I'm very bullish on the micro niche strategy, which is basically like pick a very small defined niche and only talk about what these people want to hear, whether that's in your ads or your content. That's what I've chosen to do myself, and it's paying off pretty great. That's what a few of my clients have chosen to do. a few of my tax accountant clients have gone either, short-term rentals, or I've got one guy targeting gym owners. Like, it's so very specific. And this isn't because your strategies or the thing you're doing only works for that type of person, right? Because if I'm a gym
Right.
owner, my tax situation is realistically not that different from like a retail space owner or any other type of small business with a brick and mortar location, right? So it's the same strategies on the accountant side, but it's a completely different message on the from the standpoint of the client. And so just
Absolutely.
dialing in on that very specific ideal client you have and picking that kind of micro niche. I see a lot of people doing that, and I think that's kind of where we're going to go, because there's so many generalists already and they just don't stand out anymore.
Yeah, they really don't. There has to be a unique aspect, whether it's who you serve or how you show up or something about you that makes you memorable to someone is going to make the whole difference for them.
Mhm.
Anything else that you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap up?
I mean, I think the big thing, guys, is as you're creating your content and as you're, running ads. Again, like we've talked about this a couple of times throughout these episodes, but the biggest thing that I want you to be thinking about is just get in the head of your ideal audience. Go talk to some real people who are your ideal audience, whether that's past or current clients, or people who like you've never worked with before, but just understand their problems. And if you can show that you understand their problems and you can show you understand where they want to be in the future, then there's a 100% chance that there will be a great sense of connection there.
Completely agree. Peter, thank you so much for joining us today. And would you mind just sharing with our audience how can they find out more about working with you or find out what you're up to and how they can learn from you beyond this episode?
Yeah, absolutely. So the main platform I'm on is Instagram. It's at PeterVNDR. I've also got a podcast that just launched. Has just launched as of the date of this podcast going live. It's just called the Peter Vanderwall Show. You can look it up anywhere you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, even. So I think if you like podcasts, go check me out there. If you like social, go check me out on Instagram. And I'd love to connect with you guys.
Amazing. We'll have all those links in the show notes so you guys can just click on those to learn more from Peter. Thank you so much for joining me today, Peter. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Shannon.